This is the latest in a series of global webinars organized and sponsored by the Eye on Earth Alliance. My name is Derek Gludon, and I am the organizer and host for today's webinar. I work for the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, one of the founder members of the Eye on Earth movement, and I'm speaking to you from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Earth is a global community of individuals and organizations that collaborate across disciplines and geographies to strengthen the environmental component of sustainable development. Eye on Earth focuses on enabling the demand, creation, availability, discoverability, usability, and the use of environmental and related socioeconomic data, information, and knowledge for all stakeholders in society. Our Eye on Earth movement has two main components. First, a convening and governing partnership of some of the foremost data and information-focused organizations in the environmental dimension of sustainable development. And they are, in alphabetical order, the Group on Earth Observations, GEO, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, the UN Environment, and the World Resources Institute, WRI, and my employer, the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi, to whom a special word of thanks extended for providing the staff time and enabling technology for the webinar series. The second and core component of Eye on Earth is yourselves, a multidisciplinary, truly global community of experts defined by a shared passion for the Eye on Earth mission, vision, and principles. And the magnitude and diversity of the Eye on Earth community is evidenced by the distribution of people who have registered for this webinar. You are close to 400 people today from a record-breaking, in fact, over 95 different countries. And as you can see, you represent every part of the globe. Whether you're attending live or watching the video afterwards, welcome. It's now my privilege and pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Katarina Rebello is Director of Programs at the Center for Open Data Enterprise, CODE. In this role, she oversees all federal and international programs, including CODE's Open Data Roundtables and the SDG National Reporting Initiative. Katarina's work focuses on the intersection of politics, policy, and technology innovation. Throughout her time at CODE, Katarina has led roundtables with the White House and numerous federal agencies, bringing together government data providers and data users. Katarina has also facilitated workshops at the United Nations on using data to achieve the SDGs. Prior to joining CODE, Katarina worked at 1776, a global startup incubator and seed fund based in Washington, D.C. She also worked at the Group of 50 Foundation, a global business community operating under the auspices of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Katarina holds an MA, a Master of Arts honours degree from the University of St Andrews in Scotland. Caleb Rudow is a research fellow, also at the Centre for Open Data Enterprise, where he works on the SDG National Reporting Initiative. He researches patterns of data use, open data policy, and the development of SDG national reporting platforms. Caleb has specialized research experience in both qualitative and quantitative methods, especially in running randomized control trials. As a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia, Caleb worked on the USAID's climate change program and the Zambian Forestry Department to develop GIS trainings and geospatial projects. After the Peace Corps, he attended the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, where he focused his studies on data analysis for international development. At the Lyndon B. Johnson School, Caleb worked on the AID data report, Avoiding Data Graveyards, Insights from Data Producers and Users in 3 countries. He was also program manager for the Innovations for Peace and Development Research Lab. Caleb and Katarina both join us from Washington, D.C., where it is just 9 o'clock in the morning. So at this point, I will now hand over to Katarina, our speaker.
Thank you, Derek, for those introductions. And thanks to everyone who's joining us for this webinar on strategies for SDG national reporting. My name is Katarina Rebello, and I'm Director of Programs at the Center for Open Data Enterprise, also known by our acronym CODE. We're a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that works to maximize the value of government data. In this capacity, I'm leading the SDG National Reporting Initiative, a 2-year initiative funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We're working to facilitate information sharing on SDG reporting. As Derek mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague Caleb Rudow, who is a research fellow working on this initiative. He and I will be co-presenting today, sharing more about our work on the SDG National Reporting Initiative and answering your questions. To kick things off, I'll start by providing some context on the SDG National Reporting Initiative, defining what we mean when we say SDG reporting and why SDG reporting matters. I'll also summarize current progress towards SDG reporting to date. Then I'll hand it off to Caleb, who will walk through strategic considerations and approaches that are valuable for governments to consider as they're assessing their options for reporting on the SDGs. This will include several specific country experiences and a handful of demos showcasing different approaches to SDG reporting. Throughout this webinar, you'll hear several acronyms used frequently, including National Reporting Platforms, which are known as NRPs, and of course, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, known commonly as the SDGs. Before we talk more about the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, I'll give a brief overview of the SDG National Reporting Initiative. Our initiative works to facilitate greater information sharing for reporting on the SDGs between international, regional, and local communities. We started this initiative back in September 2017 and officially launched in March 2018. When we began this initiative, we realized there was a real need for easily accessible information on SDG reporting. Our ultimate objective is to help governments and international organizations navigate all of the different policy, data, and technical considerations that are part of this process. We operate from the position that there's no one-size-fits-all approach for SDG reporting, and that there are many options to meet the needs of different countries. As part of our work to facilitate information sharing, the initiative launched sdgreporting.org, a website with over 80 informational resources on SDG reporting. The site, which is shown here, is designed to help users find answers to common questions about reporting on the SDGs. It also provides a central location for relevant resources, which can be filtered by topic, country, and language. In addition to our website, the initiative recently published Strategies for SDG National Reporting, which is shown here and is available on sdgreporting.org. The contents of this report and this webinar both draw on substantial work being done by our partners and other key stakeholders who are focused on SDG reporting. We've included links to some additional resources at the end of this presentation for those who are interested in learning more. So as previously mentioned, the concept for the SDG National Reporting Initiative emerged in response to the UN 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. In September 2015, 193 member states committed to work towards a set of goals to address poverty, hunger, climate change, and other critical global challenges. This 2030 Agenda includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, supported by 169 targets and 232 indicators. The UN resolution that established the SDGs described these 17 goals as being universally applicable, while also taking into account different national realities and priorities. Through the process of SDG reporting, countries can make data and statistics on the SDGs publicly available. As you'll see here, our initiative understands SDG reporting as the act of publishing and disseminating data and statistics on the SDG indicators for key stakeholders, including UN custodian agencies, government policymakers, businesses, NGOs, research institutions, and the general public. SDG reporting can be a valuable tool to help governments achieve their goals by enabling policymakers to understand where their country stands in relation to the SDG targets and how far they still need to go. Governments can use this data to inform policy decisions and engage stakeholders around specific goals. For example, a policymaker interested in education can look at indicators for SDG 4 on quality education and answer questions like, how are government-funded literacy programs impacting literacy rates over time? How many girls attend school? Or what proportion of schools have access to electricity? SDG reporting can also help identify data gaps, as well as improve access to national and subnational data and statistics. It's important to note that many non-governmental stakeholders can also benefit from SDG reporting. For example, by using this data to inform their advocacy work and holding governments accountable for making progress on the SDGs. Organizations working on ocean conservation, for example, can use indicators on SDG 14 to track country commitments to protect coastal and marine areas. The SDGs and their targets and indicators have created many new data collection and maintenance needs for countries around the world. This slide summarizes some of the steps that have been taken to advance SDG reporting. It's important to note that countries are at many stages of this process. Several countries are working to align their national and subnational government departments as part of developing an overall SDG implementation plan. Others are at the stage of evaluating their statistical capacity and mapping data availability. Over 60 countries have published voluntary national reports to the UN High-Level Political Forum, which helps to inform the global community of a nation's progress towards achieving the SDGs. Taking it one step further, more than 35 countries are using national reporting platforms to disseminate data on the SDGs. These platforms publish data and statistics in an easily accessible way, such as a website. As part of the SDG National Reporting Initiative, we've been tracking the development of these platforms around the world, and we've published an online inventory on our website, which shows a variety of approaches and options that are available. On the international level, there's been a concerted effort by the UN and other stakeholders to support progress on SDG reporting. In January 2018, the UN Statistics Division convened a meeting on national platforms for SDG reporting. In March, the UN Economic Commission for Europe also hosted a workshop on reporting and communicating statistics for the SDGs. These meetings, among many others, are helping to encourage the development of common guidelines and principles. SDG reporting is also being discussed at major international conferences, including the upcoming UN World Data Forum in October. I'm now going to hand it over to Caleb, who's going to talk through several strategic considerations that can help guide country implementation of SDG reporting.
Thank you for the introduction, Katarina. The goal of this next section of the presentation is to help countries to answer this question. What are the key considerations they should consider when doing SDG reporting? We will start to answer this question with the policy considerations that are important for SDG reporting. Since SDG reporting is supposed to be country-led and country-driven, each country is expected to apply their own policies, institutional frameworks, and develop their own implementation strategy. National alignment of SDGs. The first step of this process is to align SDG reporting with existing national priorities. For example, countries working to reduce under-5 mortality rates for their own national priorities can align those data sets with corresponding SDG targets and indicators. Countries can also identify opportunities to align their SDG reporting efforts with other international and regional reporting frameworks. Often countries have multiple goal frameworks with corresponding reporting requirements that relate to sustainable development. Tanzania, for example, has the Tanzania Development Vision 2025, the UN 2030 Agenda, and the African Union's Agenda 2063. That is 3 different reporting requirements for Tanzania, not including their own national and subnational goals. In some cases, regional bodies like the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the African Union are working to address these multiple goal frameworks in the hopes of reducing the reporting burden for countries. SDG reporting also requires significant coordination across government ministries and departments. Typically, one government body serves as the policy focal point, while another, usually a national statistical office, serves as a data collection and coordination lead. In some cases, one office may serve both roles in SDG reporting. The exact institutional arrangement varies from country to country. There are policy, legal, and security issues with SDG reporting. As governments develop policies for SDG reporting, they will equally need to consider the data privacy of their citizens and measures to ensure data security. A core part of SDG reporting is the publication and dissemination of data, not only to government agencies and international organizations, but also to the general public. Effective data privacy and security measures are needed to prevent the publication of personally identifiable information. To address these concerns, governments may explore establishing data security laws, privacy compliance reviews to identify and mitigate these risks, and trainings and guidelines for those working with potentially sensitive data. The SDGs require national governments to develop a long-term strategy for reporting through 2030. The long-term nature of the SDGs makes it important to take into account how political shifts, budget issues, and technical considerations could affect SDG reporting. To mitigate these risks, it is important to consider a few things. Developing an institutional framework. While strong supporters of the SDG agenda can start the reporting process, institutional programs are needed to sustain it. Government data initiatives may lose momentum in the transition from one administration to the next, and commitments to reporting on the SDGs need to be institutionalized to be durable. One way of doing this is to choose a permanent government agency to conduct SDG reporting. Governments at all levels can also provide incentives, including funding and career advancement, for utilizing the SDG framework and reporting the results. This approach, however, requires support from higher government offices like the Ministry of Finance and the long-term availability of resources to support the incentives. Building partnerships. In many cases, SDG reporting will be carried out by a range of stakeholders contributing data, resources, and expertise. Agreements or partnerships need to take into account the objectives of the reporting country and sustainability issues. There should be a specific focus on the long-term timing of support commitments from partner organizations to ensure that there are not gaps in funding that could cause lapses in reporting. Partnerships can also be used around sharing capacity. One successful example that we've seen of a capacity sharing partnership is the one between the United States and the United Kingdom to develop and collaborate on open source national reporting platforms. Open source signifies code or software that is freely available and can be modified or redistributed. Both countries have been meeting regularly to write code, share information, and work together to create their own open source national reporting platforms. The results of their work is that both countries now have fully functioning open source platforms with a variety of features, some of which we will demonstrate later in this presentation. The US and UK also went a step further and have been working with other countries to help them adopt and modify the open source NRPs that they have created. In addition to institutional sustainability issues, it is also important for governments to consider financing options for SDG reporting and capacity development. Financial resources for this may come from country budgets, international NGOs, or a combination of sources. Regional organizations, such as the UN Economic and Social Commissions, can also create opportunities for cooperation on matters such as resource mobilization and capacity building. Capacity development is needed for both data collection and reporting implementation. Though this report focuses more on the capacities needed for reporting, it should be noted that the capacities related to data collection are equally important and need to be accounted for. According to the Conference of European Statisticians in their report, Roadmap on Statistics for Sustainable Development Goals, capacity should be developed for statistics in general and not just for SDG-related activities. The report also notes that capacity building should go beyond producing selected products or indicators and deal with the institutional, financial, and human resource issues that are also related to capacity. In other words, it takes more than just the capacity to write code, manage, and analyze data to make statistical reporting possible. Because the National Statistical Office is typically the focal point for SDG statistics, the focus on capacity development should start there. But it is also important to build the capacity of other data producers and agencies related to SDG reporting. There are also data considerations for reporting on the SDGs that policymakers should consider on how to make the data more useful and accessible. These details should not be overlooked in SDG reporting, or a country risks reducing the effectiveness of their SDG dissemination. Availability of official data. Now, this may be an obvious point, but is an important one. Data can only be reported if it exists and is made available. This requires a commitment to national reporting from national governments and agreements between ministries and data producers to create the SDG indicators and make them available. Disaggregation. A core tenet of the 2030 Agenda is the concept of no one left behind. The principle that sustainable development must include all people, regardless of sex, age, race, ethnicity, and other considerations. In order for countries to best target their development strategies and policies, they will need data that has been disaggregated or broken down into subgroups by the variables of interest. Policymakers need timely data to make evidence-based decisions. This is particularly important for indicators that need to be monitored more frequently, such as the SDG indicator for food price anomalies. Data on the fluctuations of food prices would be needed more frequently than once per year to be relevant and meaningful for policymakers to provide relief to citizens in case food prices spike. One tool that can be used to make data more timely is application programming interfaces, or more commonly known as APIs. APIs allow for data to be created once and automatically published or made available to others. This makes it easier for developers to create applications using up-to-date versions of the data to visualize it, publish it on other platforms, or for a number of other creative projects. One example of this is the United Nations Statistics Division's SDG API. This API allows developers to access up-to-date versions of UNSD's data and use it for their own applications. Another important consideration is to have metadata and standards to make data easier to work with and increase interoperability. Without metadata, policymakers may lack adequate background information needed to use the data. Without standards, it is much harder to compare data and understand the progress across geographical regions and time. The accuracy and reliability of data and statistics are essential if they are to be useful for evidence-based decision-making. SDG reporting programs must include mechanisms for ensuring data validation and quality control. And lastly, openness. Open data, data that is free, publicly available, without restrictions, and in a machine-readable format, can improve data use and impact. The benefits of openness are particularly relevant to SDG reporting, as open data provides public insight into a country's progress and allows a wide range of stakeholders to analyze the data and provide expertise. Now, zooming out here, we're going to talk about the big picture technical considerations for SDG reporting and how a country would choose a software solution or select a software provider. Different technical options require varying levels of resources and expertise. Governments should consider their existing technical capacity when choosing a technical approach, as certain approach will require more capacity for maintenance and data management. Now, there are three main options that we have seen countries use. One is open source. Open source software, again, is free and can be redistributed and modified at no charges to users. Though the software is free, there are still human resource costs to hire technical staff to modify and maintain an open source platform. Several countries have built open source national reporting platforms, and the code for these platforms can be adopted and modified by other countries to create their own national reporting platforms. Proprietary. Several technical solution providers have developed proprietary tools and platforms for coordinating and publishing data on the SDGs. Providers tailor these tools to a country's needs and provide ongoing technical support to reduce the technical capacity needed to manage the platform. These proprietary solutions can feature a wide variety of data management, analysis, and visualization tools that vary depending on the technical solutions provider. There's also a hybrid approach. Countries may choose to combine open source and proprietary options. Using elements of both options gives countries the benefits of open source software with additional support and customization from a technical solutions provider. For example, Mexico's Agenda 2030 platform combines an open source approach with Esri's geospatial tools to provide maps and visualizations. Now, moving from talking about strategies to talking about actual reporting approaches or implementation of these strategies. To date, countries have adopted one of three approaches for reporting on the SDGs. Some countries are incorporating an SDG reporting module within an existing national platform. Others have developed entirely new platforms dedicated to providing data on the SDGs, and still other countries are providing their data as a regionally maintained platform. We're going to give an overview of the characteristics of each and a demo for each of these reporting approaches. Some countries have chosen to leverage their existing platforms and to add an existing module on their websites to report on the SDGs. These SDG modules are typically added to a country's existing National Statistical Office website or national open data platform. One of the benefits of this approach is that it leverages existing resources and can often be done more quickly than other approaches. This approach also provides a central location for all data and statistics. That is, statistics from the NSO, as well as SDG reporting goals data. One of the challenges, however, is that these kinds of systems may be limited in functionality or have to work in the legacy website systems where the NSOs have housed their data. There are a few examples of countries that have pursued this strategy, and we will look at the Philippines platforms for our first example and demo. So here you have the Philippines NSO platform. And this is the source for data for the Philippines, both on SDGs and on statistics in general. And we click through the statistics and we can find the module for sustainable development goals. So here, when we click through, you can see an overview of SDG data with the text. On the right, we have the menu for options. And if we scroll down, we'll see the graphic and the SDG data here. If we look at the top, we can see that they've noted when the data was last updated. And next, we're going to dive into an indicator. So let's look at goal 3, also known as good health and well-being, in case you don't have them all memorized. So we're going to look at the first target for goal 3, which is reducing maternal mortality. So you can see that we have both the name of the target, and we can also see the data and the year that the data was published, as well as the data source who created the data or collected the data. We can also see the same for other indicators as well. Now, if we decide we want to download this data, we can scroll back up to the top and download it as a PDF. And if we decide we're interested in the metadata, we can go to the menu on the right and click on metadata, and this will give us a similar graphic as we've seen before with the metadata for each goal. And if we click on goal 3, good health and well-being, we will get to the metadata, which is downloaded, you can see in an Excel format at the bottom left. So that's a quick overview of the Philippines website and adding a module to an existing platform. Moving on to building a new platform for SDG reporting. Several countries are using centralized national reporting platforms to report on their progress. Again, NRPs can be understood as a means to report and disseminate national statistics, including SDG indicators and descriptive metadata in an easily accessible way to reach all target users. These are standalone platforms that are separate from the NSO website or other government website. And one of the benefits of this approach is that it can make it easier for a country's government to coordinate data across different ministries, departments, and subnational bodies. This approach also allows for more modification of website features and flexibility. And one of the challenges of this approach is that it requires new technical capacity and resources to develop a new website and may take more political capital and other resources to make the move. And there are a few examples of countries that have taken this approach. We are going to focus on the United Kingdom's site. So we're going to get into another demo here. So here we are looking at the UK's SDG national reporting platform. We've talked about this before. One of the things to note here is that if you see at the top in the URL, you'll notice that this is hosted on GitHub. GitHub is a platform for hosting open source code and websites. So if you scroll down, we'll see the same graphic and the 17 goals listed. So for consistency, we're going to look at goal 3 again, which is good health and well-being. And so here you can see the indicators that the NSO has made available, or the UK has made available, that pertain to goal 3, as well as their status. We're going to look through under 5 mortality rate for this example. And so here at the top, you have the indicator name, but you can also, this is one of those features that you can create with an open source platform, charts, and you can see this data in table format. So you can also select different disaggregations, as you can see on the left here. So let's select a couple of different countries, and we'll see the data populates on the right. So we can see variation between countries in their under 5 mortality rate. We can also see variation in female versus male sexes and under 5 mortality rate. And if we scroll down, we'll see the key for the map, which will kind of give us an understanding of what is there. So we also have the ability to download this data. So we can download the chart as a CSV, or we can download the source, which means kind of downloading the larger data set as well. And if we're interested in the metadata, which we should be as good data scientists, we're going to look at the national metadata, which is, this is what the UK has collected and the kind of indicator that they think is relevant for this goal. In this case, it's simple because it's under 5 mortality. We also have the global metadata, and this is the metadata for the SDGs in general. And we have our sources here, which is going to tell us who created the data and when. Again, really important background information. And if we go back here, one of the benefits of GitHub and open source is that it's all very transparent and you can see the changes on the GitHub website if you decide to click through and check there. So that is the UK platform. And to finish our last approach, we're going to talk about leveraging a regional platform. Several regional bodies have developed platforms allowing countries to provide and display data on the SDGs. And in some cases, these platforms allow people to compare progress with other countries in the region. These platforms provide a number of features, such as visualizations, to help users explore the data. Some of the benefits of this approach: the interface of these websites makes it easier to compare progress across countries in a region. There is some cost to moving the data over to these new platforms, but overall the cost is minimal compared to other approaches. And one of the challenges we've seen is that these platforms can be a good option for countries with limited existing resources, but the functionalities of these platforms, don't have the flexibility to modify them according to a country's own needs. Now, there are several examples of these kinds of platforms, but for today, we're going to look at the African Information Highway. So here we have the landing page for the African Information Highway. This was developed by the African Development Bank Group. You'll see at the top of the site, we have multilingual capability for both English and French. And if you look in the middle of the page, you'll see the different reporting options in the menu here. So we're going to click on Report by SDGs and dive into the data here. So again, the same graphic, we're going to click on Health and Well-being and look at data across countries in Africa. So here we have the beginning of their data explorer. So you have a map of Africa, and if you scroll over, you can see the countries as well as their reporting rates, in this case for maternal mortality ratio. And if we're more interested in kind of looking at these in terms of a ranking or compared to each other just by the numbers, we can also look at in this graph here. And if we're interested in exporting this data, we can go to the top and export it, and it comes in several formats: a PowerPoint if you want to just show the graphics, and a PDF, as well as Excel format if you're interested in machine readable data. So we can also dive into data for just one country instead of looking at countries across a region. So if you click on Report by Country at the top of the page, you'll get a map of Africa. And if you click on a country, so for this case, we'll choose Zambia, and then you click on Show Report. This will give you data for Zambia, as well as it's pre-populated by Egypt and South Africa, but you can choose data from other countries to compare it to as well. So here you can also see the indicators on the left that relate to the goals. And we're going to look at maternal mortality ratio for Zambia and zoom in on just one. So here we have the data in a line graph, and it gets compared to Egypt and South Africa. So you can see Zambia has made quite a lot of progress in this since 1990. And we can export this data, but we're also going to look at exploring this data, which is one of the nice features of this platform. So here, if you don't want to use just a line graph, you can really choose from a range of options of other graphs, both line and bar charts, as well as pie charts in the bottom. So if you're interested in kind of more general information on the SDGs, as well as contact information, you can go to the About SDGs portion of the website, and you can contact them if you have any further questions. So now I'm going to give the floor back to Katarina.
Thank you, Caleb. I'd like to quickly summarize what we've covered in this presentation, then talk more about the road ahead. So during this presentation, we started by defining SDG reporting and considering its benefits. We then provided a brief overview of current progress towards SDG reporting. We explored several strategic considerations and looked more closely at different approaches to reporting in the context of a handful of country experiences. Overall, we're seeing that SDG reporting is more than just a reporting process for countries. By engaging in this global dialogue about data and the SDGs, countries are gaining important insights into how the 2030 agenda relates to their own priorities. Implementing an SDG reporting strategy is also an opportunity for countries to assess their technical and data infrastructures and improve their data ecosystems altogether. By doing this, countries and international organizations can ensure that SDG reporting ultimately strengthens their technical capacities while advancing and achieving sustainable development. As we look ahead, we're eager to continue this conversation with you and any organizations interested in SDG reporting. Please reach out to us directly using our online form, which is available at sdgreporting.org/contact. We want to hear from you about the topics you're interested in, the resources that would be most helpful to you, and how we might collaborate on work related to SDG reporting. As mentioned, here are some additional resources for those who would like to learn more. And now we'd like to turn it back over to Derek so that Caleb and I can answer a few questions from the audience.
Before we head into the questions and answers section, I would like to hand over to a spokesperson from the Eye on Earth Alliance. And today's Alliance spokesperson is Danny Ghaffari. Danny is Information and Knowledge Management Officer at the SDG Data and Environmental Statistics Unit at UN Environment, which is one of the custodial agencies.
Thank you, Derek. On behalf of Eye on Earth Alliance, UN Environment, and the entire partners sponsoring organizations, team and guests, and on my behalf, I extend this vote of thanks to our speakers and to the Center for Open Data Enterprise for taking the time in preparing and giving the presentation during this webinar today. A big thank you to Katarina Rebello, Director of Programs at the Center for Open Data Enterprise, to Caleb Rudow, Research Fellow at the Center for Open Data Enterprise, on your great work on the SDG National Reporting Initiative and on supporting countries in fulfilling their reporting obligations toward the Sustainable Development Goals and in monitoring the implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and by building the national capacities to improve decision-making for sustainable development. A deep sense of appreciation goes to both presenters, to their well-structured presentation, covering the background of the SDG national reporting, current progress toward the SDG reporting, the strategic consideration, including policy, data, technical infrastructure, sustainability, financing, and the most important, the capacity development and the transfer of knowledge to countries. Also for the extensive examples from countries on the different type of platform used for the SDG reporting at a national and regional levels. This work complements the work UN Environment is doing in supporting countries in establishing national strategies for environment statistics and building the national capacities for data collection and data sharing of the environmental dimension of the 2030 Agenda. And the mission and vision of the Eye on Earth Alliance in having a world where environmental and associated social and economic information combined with citizen engagement improves decisions leading to sustainable development. I cannot thank everyone enough from the organizers of this webinar, especially Derek, the technical team to make it happen. Once again, we are most grateful to our presenters and to the Center for Open Data Enterprise for taking the time in preparing this webinar. And I, on behalf of Eye on Earth Alliance UN Environment, thank all our participants for being with us during this webinar and looking forward to welcome you in new webinars in the future. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
First question, Dr. Adel Abdul Kader.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you for the speaker. My name is Adel Abdul Kader. I'm a former UNEP coordinator for West Asia. My question is really related to the institutional issues. Usually the technical issues are more workable. We can find some technical solution, but the really main challenge working with the, with national, especially at the national level, is working with the, to coordinate national institutions. So what are the key issues to consider when, an institutional issue to consider when working with implementing SDGs at the national? Thank you very much.
So just to be clear on your question, so you're talking about institutions within a country that should be doing the coordination, and kind of generally the process has been, at least in terms of the data, has been led by national statistical offices. So they've typically taken the lead on kind of the data collection and some of that coordination. And there are other focal points that can take on some more of the kind of policy and other parts of the coordination. But most of that has been led by the National Statistical Office. And I think otherwise, countries can make their own choices about other organizations if they decide not to work through the National Statistical Office. Does that answer your question?
Partly it does, because it say, well, who is the lead agency in coordinating, but what are the coordination issues that faces those lead agencies? Coordination is the key issue to really get to the data from different institutions with different setting, with different policy objective. And it's really hard to get all the institutions to work together, provide the kind of data that's required. So what are those issues that need to be considered, and how we really address them and get around them? Thank you.
Right. So I think you said part of it pretty well, that there are kind of each agency within a government has different policy considerations, different policy goals. And oftentimes, I think some agencies feel like giving up their data and sharing their data in some ways reduces some of the power they have. And so I think some organizations feel like they're kind of these data gatekeepers. They're data huggers, and that if you give the data away, they see it as this kind of like they see it as a zero-sum game, right? Whereas I think we see it as a non-zero-sum game where you kind of make the data available and everyone's better. I think there are some challenges with organizations thinking that if they give the data away, they give away some of their power as an organization. I also think there are underlying political issues generally about who does the reporting. And I think some of that has to do with kind of who is going to be the policy focal point here. So I think we've generally seen that you need a kind of higher organization in a government to be kind of the top-down person or the organization that kind of enforces some of these policies, or at least provides the resources and the political will to do so. And I think we've seen that, in countries without a higher level organization that does that kind of advocacy and pushing for these kinds of coordinations, that we see less coordination in general. Does that answer more of your question?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Great. Thank you. That's a great question.
There are a couple of questions from Yaqub Said.
Okay, this is Yaqub Said from FAO, Office of Chief Statistician. I just outlined a number of questions just to brainstorm and to have a general understanding. I mean, we may not answer all the questions at this forum, but let's brainstorm about it. One is this duplication of reporting. I mean, in the presentation I heard that there are different initiatives upcoming, and every of these initiatives require some kind of reporting, which is an additional burden at the country level. How to address this? How to really align these different needs so that we minimize the burdens? That's one concern. The coordination, I think that's very important. It's touched upon. I will skip that one. Then the third question was related to the financial and technical capacity. I mean, in particular in developing countries, there is a really limited resource available and a limited capacity, while the data needs are really increasing and demanding a high amount of financial resources and technical capacity. How best we can address this issue? Well, for instance, we talk about disaggregation. Disaggregation, one of the requirements to have a good disaggregation is to increase the sample size when data is coming from surveys or censuses. That requires additional resource, requires additional time. So how best can we really address this thing to address this disaggregation so that we can't leave anyone behind? That's an important thing we need to address. Then we talked about timeliness. In this regard, I think this time around, technology should play a very vital role in terms of addressing this timeliness issue for generating data in a very different ways. Not only new technologies in terms of gadgets, but the remote sensing is there, this webinar, web scraping, crowdsourcing, all these new things are upcoming. Therefore, how best can really we utilize existing technology to improve the timeliness of the data? Then finally, we talked about standards, and one of the issues that we should address in terms of standard is to have to utilize a standard methodology. That's one thing. And when it comes to the SDGs, some of the indicators are still in tier 3, whereby we don't have adequate and standard methodology for countries to generate the data. Now we are about 3 years of the SDG period. I mean, how quick these custodian agencies really work together to finalize this methodology so that data can be generated. I'm a little bit fast to save your time, but I think you captured my points. These are the things which we need to brainstorm. As I said, you may not need the presenters to answer all, but these are an issues to be raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all really good questions. We really love hearing from people and what they're thinking. So I made some notes and I'm going to try to address them equally. So I think in terms of the reporting burden, I think first kind of getting guidelines to kind of streamline what people are supposed to be reporting. I think that's the first step, is for people to agree on how to do so. And that oftentimes involves mapping to kind of national strategies and national indicators. But I think another issue, again, kind of talking about technology, I think automated data reporting is a really big thing that would make this reporting burden much easier on countries. So trying to find tools and technologies so that they can report to one platform, and then either that platform pulls all the information, or using SDMX, distributed data med exchange, to kind of make some of this reporting easier. In terms of capacity and financial resources, I mean, I think this is a question that we're all struggling with, and the international community is really trying to think what to do about it. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, a lot of kind of more recent measures just show that we need more resources for capacity building. I mean, I think it's kind of as simple as that in terms of the resources piece. I think there's a huge gap in some countries, and we just need kind of more international commitments to fill that gap. And ideally, those commitments would be matched in some ways by national governments as well. In terms of timeliness, I think you're right about using remote sensing and other kinds of more passive data technologies. I'm a big GIS or mapping geek, and I love kind of looking at remote sensing data sets to measure population with nighttime lights, or there's really interesting work going on that's measuring GDP in relation to nighttime lights, with the idea that the brighter the lights are, probably the more economic activity that's going on, which I think is really interesting work. But I think all that stuff should be explored. And let me see if I can get to your last question about tier 3. I think you're right. We're struggling to figure out how to measure some of these things, and that's just going to be a process. We hope that kind of involves conversations with countries and conversations with kind of both local and international stakeholders to come to some kind of agreement on how to measure these kinds of indicators. But some of them they're difficult to measure. So it's gonna be a challenge for sure. But thank you for those questions. Those were great.
Next question is from David McInnes.
It's David McInnes. I'm calling from Ottawa. Thank you very much for a very interesting content and webinar. My question is about, it seems clear to me that a whole lot is being done to consolidate data that may be existing in all sorts of places and forms in order to roll this up into a framework for the SDG reporting. But the ultimate objective of the SDGs, of course, and it was alluded to, is actually to create step change and systems change, behavior change, and so forth. So how is this data being used, or how it can be used to actually create positive social change? Or is this just a restatement, a reconsolidation of data sets that are already in existence?
So the question there is about kind of using this data for decision making, or is it about just kind of the data organization?
Yes, it's about how does the data used to make new, to look at policy options and decision making, to engage stakeholders and new dialogues about creating change, whether it's improving health and well-being or so forth.
Right. No, that's a great question. I mean, I think I think in general, kind of the open data community and a lot of the data community has been focused on supply for a long time. So with the idea that kind of you build it, they will come, and if the data is out there, then people will use it. And I think a lot of the newer research around open data is really trying to get at exactly your question, which is, if we build a data platform, who uses it? I know Open Data Watch is doing some work along with Aid Data on data use. Aid Data and Development Gateway have done projects on this in the past. And the results are mixed. They're not that everybody rushes to these platforms and uses them. And so I think we really need to think about, building the platforms, but also thinking about the capacity issues that go along with it. Are people not using this data because they don't have the capacity to either kind of work through the platform or analyze the data? I think there could be trainings that could be helpful for that. Or are there bigger picture infrastructure issues about the data? So, do you have enough internet access and access to computers for people to use that? And there's also just some larger cultural changes that need to happen in some places, and thinking about, if you were to make a decision, I think we all have our kind of go-to things that we decide to do, right? So we have go-to people we call, or we have, kind of our gut instincts about things. And some of the change that I think needs to happen is we need to have kind of this cultural shift around, how do you make a decision? And I think that's going to be a longer term process that is going to take kind of a cultural shift.
And David, to your point, I think a big part of this is going to involve needing to engage data users as these platforms are being developed. And also to Caleb's point, thinking through how people can use this data, not just focus on getting it out to the public. So I think a lot of the work that the center does and what we're interested in as part of this initiative is also involved in engaging data users.
Thank you very much.
The next question is from Gabor, who is calling from Hungary.
Okay. Yeah. My question is that, is any intention to address the issue of the development of national stakeholder engagements in the national reporting year by year? I am interested for it, especially in the interdisciplinary collaboration using geospatial and Earth observation data and geospatial and statistical data integration, with special emphasis on nexus approach, selecting several goals parallelly in interagency collaboration. This is my question.
Right. So I love these mapping questions. I think in terms of collaboration, some of my past work in Honduras around using the aid management platform, there's some work around reporting on which organizations are working in what parts of a country, and this is what they were doing in Honduras, with the hope that having this map on the table, organizations can see, I know that the UN is working over here, or USAID is working in this region, and with that information on a map, you can think more about, are we covering all of the regions that we need to be? Are we duplicating a lot of efforts in one region? And kind of you take a step back, there are these really interesting questions you can answer around, are most of our resources going to regions that are either the poorest or regions that are have kind of the lowest scores for the indicators that we are interested in? So I think mapping just really makes data real for people, and seeing a map on where organizations are working can be a really crucial tool for kind of starting that conversation. And again, this is kind of the second step of that, still has to do with this data supply use. So if we just supply a platform, will people use it? And I think there's some work around if you create the maps but you bring them to meetings and you use them as a topic of conversation in the meeting, in some ways it can be more effective at starting a conversation. If you wanted to kind of go beyond the platform approach to use geospatial information to start a conversation.
And we are seeing many countries integrate geospatial data visualizations on their platforms, and increasingly seeing that as a really positive addition.
Thank you very much for your answer.
I'm going to open the floor to Hemsing, who is calling from Mauritius. Hemsing, your mic is open.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Well, you know, when SDGs were created, I remember it was very high as agenda, and it went normally to the Prime Minister's office, or to the Ministry of Finance office, right? And but unfortunately, this is not working in the small island states, which I represent, right? All the seats we are having problem because there is no such a platform for the SDGs up to now. I give you the example of Mauritius. Well, first of all, I would like to say that my organization, the Small Island Developing States in Africa, are part of an African working group, which is very active in the SDGs, and we are working very much with the Africa Regional Office based in Kigali, Rwanda. But when I have been asked to do some survey in Mauritius, it was to my surprise that nothing exists, right? I went to the Ministry of Finance. Yes, it was there. Well, the committee was being formed. Nothing happened. Now I have been informed that it has changed ministry. It has gone to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and still waiting for the platform to be formed. Now, my question is this. Now, since SDGs are country-led, right? We, the people from the CSOs, we have no say. So how can we benefit, or how can we be part of this system so as to put some pressure? Or is it possible from your side to see that each country has got a national platform on SDGs? Because we want to work, we are working, but it's a shame that at national level we do not represent anything. Thank you very much.
I think that's another tricky question. I mean, I think getting governments to move and develop new platforms and work through kind of existing bureaucracy can always be challenging. I wish we had an easy answer for that. I think advocacy is important. I think thinking long term in terms of kind of making these government changes is important. So kind of, and engaging stakeholders.
Yeah, and just to add, I think we've seen a lot of countries, perhaps in a similar situation as Mauritius, leverage existing relationships that they have, with other countries who are working on reporting. So you mentioned that you're, part of a working group that's focused on SDGs, kind of continuing to engage in those groups, reaching out to other groups that are working on this as well. There's a lot of work that can be done by one country that can inform the experience of another. So I think the hope would be, as much as possible, leaning on other countries, neighbors and others who can share their experiences and work together on moving this forward. Does that answer part of your question?
Yes, okay, partly. As I said, at Africa level, at regional level, we are doing very good. We are doing very well. We are working with the African focal point, or how do you say, African center for SDGs, right? But unfortunately, at national level, most of the small islands, we are suffering from this not being partner or not being a stakeholder at national level because of the fact that there is no such a platform formed so far.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had an easy answer for that, but I think some of it's just developing a long-term approach and building partnerships and reaching out to other stakeholders to kind of build the will to start something like this.
And we would really encourage you, if you're interested, to reach out to us on our contact us page. We work with a lot of countries in this space and would be happy to coordinate any conversations that would be helpful. So please do get in touch with us. We'd love to know more about the work that you're all doing.
Okay, thank you very much.
One last question. Bruce, I've opened your mic if you wanted to put your question.
McCormack, the president of IRLOGI, the Irish Organisation for Geographic Information. I've worked in government departments in both South Africa and here in Ireland, where I'm based at the moment. And what I've found is that there can be quite a big gap between evidence, that's data, information and all that stuff, and policy. and then between policy and actual implementation on the ground. The question I've got is, has there been any sustained, systematic monitoring of the actual policies that have been changed, whether they might be financial changes which have taken place, and also the actual practical impacts on the ground of policies which you can link back ultimately to the SDGs?
I think that's a great question. I mean, some of the kind of difficulty here is, trying to find the data and trying to find kind of the information to answer that question. I would love it if we had kind of a big data set that had, policies and policies changed, and see how that related to either the release of data or to indicators on the ground. But some of this we're kind of limited just by the information we have. And I think, probably the approach to that, and with a lot of cases that we've been taking in this kind of open data community, has been around looking through case studies. So in absence of, having this data set, a lot of the work is around asking people of how have you used data to change a policy, and how has that affected implementation on the ground. And I think that work has been difficult enough to try to track down kind of these examples and track down examples that work well. But I think that's kind of at least right now, the cutting edge of this stuff is just having conversations, which I think is important for that. And it's also just a huge part of kind of what we do is asking people and seeing what they're thinking and how policies have changed because of the SDG data.
Thank you. I'm afraid with that, we're going to have to bring the Q&A to an end. Before we close, I wanted to share some news of two very significant and very important events. One we've already had reference to. The second occurrence of the United Nations World Data Forum, organized by the Statistics Division of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, will be held here in the country where I'm sitting, in the United Arab Emirates, from the 22nd to the 24th of October. And full details of that, including registration details, are available at undataforum.org. And I'm happy to report that it being in the same country as ourselves, the Eye on Earth Movement Secretariat has been in contact with the country host of the UN Data Forum, and together we will be holding concurrently an Eye on Earth symposium. This is a small event. Those of you who have attended previous Eye on Earth summits need to understand this is a much smaller event, but we are simply providing a focal point for folks who have a particular interest in the environmental pillar of sustainability to meet and to share knowledge, particularly to network and to collaborate in line with the Eye on Earth mission and vision. Do keep an eye, please, on your email accounts, and do check the Eye on Earth website, the domain down here, eye-on-earth.net. There is a registration page there at the moment. I wonder if I could just turn back to the speakers if you have any closing comments you wanted to make.
Thanks, Derek, and thank you to you and Eye on Earth for convening this webinar. Thank you to Danny for your vote of thanks, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today for this webinar on strategies for SDG national reporting.
And until our next webinar, thank you all. Have a great rest of the day.